It was called many things. It was called the White Plague. It was called consumption because it consumed your body as you got thinner and thinner toward death. And you can't breathe because it's in your lungs. And so many people suffered and died from it, but no one quite knew why. A German scientist, Robert Koch, discovered in the early 1880s that tuberculosis was an airborne bacillus, but somehow this knowledge did not translate to how are we going to cure it. So that was when they decided that altitude, sunshine, good diet, lots of bed rest, all of that was your only hope for being cured. The city fathers, who were present in all railroad boom towns, which is what Albuquerque was, were trying to boost their town or promote their particular town so that it would grow and get larger and be more prosperous. And the city fathers here called the Commercial Club, which was the forerunner of the Chamber of Commerce, decided to start advertising tuberculosis. Come out here and get cured. They literally put out little booklets that were booster booklets to cause the tuberculosis person to want to come. One of them said, "You want health and wealth, why settle for either? Albuquerque has both." So this attracted many people with tuberculosis to come here. In fact, in the records of Presbyterian Hospital, almost all the patients are from somewhere else. People walked, they came in wagons, and then when the train came in 1880, that was a particular time when more people began to come because they could get here. So they would come in on the train, and then there was nowhere for them to live because we didn't have tuberculosis facilities in Albuquerque. So people would live in little cottages, they would live in little shacks, they would actually live in tents, they would live out in the open, hoping that the climate, that is the lack of humidity and the elevation, was going to help clear their lungs. These three little houses are tuberculosis cottages, so someone clearly built these probably to rent them out, I would suspect, so that people with tuberculosis could come and stay. And you'll notice that they all have these front porches that have been closed in. Originally, I'm sure those were open screen porches for people to sleep in at night. It was a big rage to sleep outside at night. Tuberculosis caused that fad among ordinary people who also started building sleeping porches on their house. So you can't look at a house and say, oh, a tubercular lived there because there's a porch, because maybe it was just the popular architectural thing to do. People around town, including this neighborhood, often rented out a room to the sick people and let them stay with them. And some people had like mini sanatoriums in their house where they would take care of 2 or 3 tuberculosis patients. The neighborhood was kind of problematic because people were all living together in these very close quarters, and so of course the other people in the family were naturally infected with tuberculosis. People began to realize that it was contagious. So I'd say by the late 20s and the early 30s, you begin to see advertisements in newspapers that will say room for rent, no sick. People who didn't have a place to go, it was sort of similar to some homeless communities now. They would build a cottage out of scrap material and whatever they could find. The first sanatorium was in 1902 in this neighborhood, but to the north of us, and that was St. Joseph Sanatorium. And then there was no other until 1908. Hugh Cooper was a Presbyterian minister who was sent out here because he had tuberculosis, and they sent him out here to get well, and he did. He rented a house and brought his family, and he got cured of his tuberculosis. As Reverend Cooper began to get better, he and his wife went calling on the sick people who were out in the hills living in the shacks and the cottages and the tents. And he became imbued with a desire to create another hospital. And as a result, we have Presbyterian Hospital today. Tuberculosis patients had a real subculture because sometimes they were out here in these sanatoriums literally for years. So they developed subcultures. Some of them put out a newspaper, and you would see them. They called Central Avenue, which is our main street, they call Central Avenue TB Row, Lunger's Row, Tuberculosis Alley, because of all the sanatoriums, and the people would be walking up and down in pajamas and a bathrobe. And New Mexico, and particularly Albuquerque, profited from tuberculosis because not only did we grow and become a medical mecca, We also got a lot of people who got well and stayed. Senator Clinton P. Anderson came with tuberculosis and stayed to be our senator. Our most famous politician and his wife, Clyde and Carrie Tingley, lived in a little cottage just a few blocks from where we're standing because she had tuberculosis when they first came to town. During World War II, they discovered penicillin and some of the sulfa antibiotics, and they were first used for the soldiers to cure their wounds and diseases. And then they began to catch hold. So by the late 40s, tuberculosis was a curable condition. Instead of coming here to have your lung collapsed or a rib removed or some of these other rather esoteric treatments, they began to give antibiotics, which of course cured it. So at that point, the major sanatoriums had to either become full-service hospitals or fail because they didn't have any more business. Tuberculosis underpins Albuquerque today because we have quite a large medical community. We have a university medical center, we have research facilities, and this is all because of the tuberculosis patients who came early on. Obviously, a few people caught tuberculosis. Yes, that's true. But I think overall it was a blessing because it did exactly what the city fathers wanted. It grew the town, and it attracted many, many people who fell in love with it and stayed to benefit the state and the city.